Welcome, this is Cheating Facts. Tell me where you're watching from. Have you ever had that sinking feeling when you realize everyone around you knows something you don't? When the whispers stop the moment you walk into a room. That's exactly what happened to me. And I want to know, have you ever discovered something about someone close to you that completely shattered your perception of who they were? Tell me in the comments below. My name is Connor, and for 3 years, I thought I had the perfect marriage with Natasha. She was brilliant, ambitious, and had this way of making everyone in the room feel like they were the most important person there. We met at a company mixer when she was working for a consulting firm downtown, and I was doing IT support for a mid-sized accounting practice. She was everything I wasn't: confident, outgoing, always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. The whispers started about 6 months ago. At first, they were so subtle I almost missed them entirely. I'd walk into the break room at work, and conversations would shift. My colleague Janet would give me these sympathetic looks that I couldn't quite understand. When I asked her about it, she'd just shake her head and say something about people needing to mind their own business. But then the comments became more pointed. "How's Natasha's new project going?" Someone would ask with this strange emphasis on the word project. Or, "She's been working a lot of late nights lately, hasn't she?" The way they said it made my stomach twist, but I pushed those feelings down. Natasha was ambitious. She'd always worked long hours. That's who she was. The first real crack in my denial came when I ran into Marcus, one of Natasha's former colleagues, at the grocery store. We'd met several times at company events, and he'd always been friendly. But that day, he looked genuinely shocked to see me. "Connor, hey man." He seemed uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "How are you doing? I mean, how are you really doing?" I told him I was fine, confused by the intensity in his voice. He studied my face for a long moment, then shook his head. "You don't know, do you?" When I asked what he meant, he just patted my shoulder and said, "Take care of yourself, okay? You deserve better." That conversation haunted me for days. I started paying closer attention to Natasha's schedule, her mood when she came home, the way she guarded her phone. She'd always been protective of her work communications, citing client confidentiality. So I'd never questioned it before. But now I noticed how she'd take calls in the other room, how she'd angle her laptop screen away from me when I walked by. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in March. Natasha said she had another late client dinner and wouldn't be home until after midnight. I'd stopped by the pharmacy to pick up her allergy medication when I realized I'd grabbed her purse instead of the empty, reusable bag I'd intended to take. When I opened it to put the medication inside, a handful of receipts fell out. Hotel receipts. The Marriott downtown, the Hampton Inn by the airport, the boutique place on 5th Street. All from the past 2 months. All charged to a credit card I didn't recognize. My hands were shaking as I looked through them. Some were for single nights. Others were for afternoon blocks. 3 hours here, 4 hours there. The dates corresponded perfectly with her. Client dinners and weekend strategy sessions. I sat in my car in that parking lot for almost an hour, staring at those receipts. Part of me wanted to drive straight to the Marriott to confirm what I already knew, but a larger part of me was terrified of what I might find. Instead, I went home and did something I'd never done before. I looked through her things. Really looked. In the back of her jewelry box, I found a second phone, a cheap prepaid model that I'd never seen before. The call log was full of numbers I didn't recognize, and there were text messages. Dozens of them. The messages weren't what I expected. There was affection there, yes, but also something else. Something that made my blood run cold. References to the timeline and phase 2. And once everything is transferred. There were mentions of bank account numbers, property deeds, and something about life insurance modifications. One message in particular stopped me cold. "Patient is going perfectly. He still has no idea. Give me 6 more months, and we'll have everything we need." I screenshot everything before the magnitude of what I was reading really hit me. This wasn't just an affair. This was something much more calculated, much more dangerous. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it and waited for Natasha to come home. She walked in at 1:15 a.m., apologizing for the late night and complaining about demanding clients. She kissed my forehead and headed straight for the shower. Everything was exactly as it had always been, except now I could see the performance in every gesture. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to the office of a private investigator I'd found online. His name was Detective Raymond Torres. a former police officer who specialized in infidelity cases. When I showed him the messages and receipts, his expression grew increasingly grave. "Mr. Connor," he said finally, "I don't think your wife is just having an affair. Based on what you've shown me, I think she's running a long-term con." These references to timelines and asset transfers. This looks like she's been systematically positioning herself to take everything you have. Over the next 2 weeks, Detective Torres uncovered a trail that left me reeling. Natasha hadn't just been unfaithful. She'd been living an entirely fabricated life. Her consulting work was a front. She'd been working with a man named Eric Volkov, someone with a history of targeting middle-income men for elaborate financial schemes. The hotel meetings weren't romantic encounters. They were planning sessions. The life insurance policy she'd convinced me to increase last year? Eric was listed as the secondary beneficiary through a shell company. The joint accounts she'd talked me into opening? She'd been slowly moving funds into offshore accounts I knew nothing about. But the most chilling discovery came when Detective Torres ran a background check on Natasha herself. Her name, her employment history, even her college records. Half of it was fabricated. The woman I'd married, the woman I'd shared a bed with for 3 years, barely existed. The whispers at work finally made sense. Eric had been posing as a potential client, meeting with people at my company to gather information about my salary, my benefits, my financial situation. He'd been building a profile of exactly what I was worth. And several of my colleagues had put the pieces together long before I had. When I confronted Natasha, she didn't deny it. She didn't apologize or try to explain. She simply looked at me with this cold calculation and said, "You weren't supposed to find out this soon. Eric said you were too trusting to figure it out." She packed a bag that night and left. I never saw her again, but Detective Torres tracked her movements. She and Eric had moved on to Minneapolis, where they'd already begun targeting their next victim, a widower with a substantial life insurance settlement. The legal aftermath was a nightmare. Recovering the stolen funds took 8 months and cost me most of my savings in legal fees. I had to testify in court about the extent of the deception, reading those text messages aloud in front of a judge, who looked as stunned as I'd felt. The divorce was finalized last month. Natasha, whose real name turned out to be Rebecca Lindquist, was sentenced to 4 years for fraud and identity theft. Eric got 7 years. But the part that still haunts me isn't the money or the legal proceedings. It's the realization that for 3 years, I shared my life with someone who saw me as nothing more than a mark. Every kiss, every conversation, every moment of intimacy was part of an elaborate performance, designed to strip away everything I'd worked for. The whispers at work have stopped now. My colleagues look at me with sympathy instead of that strange mixture of pity and knowledge they carried before. Janet still checks on me regularly, making sure I'm eating properly and not isolating myself too much. I've started seeing a therapist to work through the trust issues this experience has created. She tells me that what happened wasn't my fault, that these kinds of predators are skilled at exploiting basic human decency. But some days, I still wonder how I could have been so blind to what was happening right in front of me. I'm sharing this story because I want others to know that sometimes the person sleeping next to you is a complete stranger. Sometimes the whispers around you aren't gossip. They're warnings. And sometimes the most dangerous betrayals come wrapped in the package of everything you thought you wanted. Trust your instincts. Pay attention to the people who care about you. And remember that real love doesn't require you to remain blind to obvious red flags. If this story resonated with you, or if you've experienced something similar, please share it in the comments. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these experiences is the first step toward healing. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories about the complicated, messy, sometimes devastating truth about human relationships.